Good afternoon. Good afternoon to all of you. A big warm welcome on behalf of the organizing Alliance C189, organizing team of 9 organizations here today. We are at the closing session of a 2-day conference on the ILO Domestic Workers Convention 10 years on. What we have seen during these 2 days were the achievements, but also the gaps that still need to be filled to have a correct implementation of the convention. And during this closing session, we will speak with the organizations themselves, what they see as policy recommendations, and hear also from the EU stakeholders what their takeaways are and how they what they will try to accomplish over the next years. But let me first go over some of the housekeeping instructions, and we will see them as a summary in the slide. So this event will be recorded and made available on the websites of all the participating organizations of the Alliance. Your microphone as a participant is muted to ensure the quality of the session, and of course also of the speakers while not speaking. And for questions, we invite all the participants to use the Q&A button. You find it on the control bar, and you're also welcome to share your comments in the chat box. Now, to understand us correctly, please don't hesitate to use the interpretation. We've provided them in 7 languages. And last but not least, if you need technical support, you can use the chat box. Now, I already said in these closing sessions, we will have some policy recommendations, but we will also have comments and responses from EU stakeholders. But we also want to hear from you, participants. We want this to be an interactive session. And what we propose is to keep time at the end for the exchange of views with you. So therefore, I invite all of the speakers to be really diligent about the use of their time. Every speaker has about maximum 6 minutes for making their statement. That way, we can really have a dedicated time to Q&A at the end, the exchange of views. But we also have a second way of keeping this session interactive, and that is via a question to you, to the audience, on how you think, what you believe are EU-wide initiatives that need to be taken to make domestic workers convention implemented correctly. So in which area should the EU-wide initiatives regarding domestic work be focused on? Take your time to answer this using the menti.com tool with the code. We will copy this in the chat, so you have the instructions there. And while after the first list of speakers, we will see in a slide your one word answer to this question. So, okay. So let's look at the list of speakers we have, and that is on our next slide. So I first will invite Marie-Béatrice Levaux, President of EFE, to take the floor. And voilà, Madame Levaux, vous allez parler en français et vous êtes présidente of the European Federation for Family Employment and Home Care. Please, what are your policy recommendations for domestic workers in the EU?
Merci infiniment, vous m'entendez? Tout va bien, parfait. Je parlerai en français. Merci de me donner la parole pour ouvrir cette session de conclusion avec des travaux de grande qualité pendant ces 2 jours. Vous l'avez rappelé, Madame. Merci encore de votre invitation. Alors, la Fédération européenne des emplois de la famille couvre évidemment le large spectre de ce que l'on emploie, de ce que l'on parle, dont on parle, c'est-à-dire des emplois au domicile des concitoyens européens qui vont des activités domestiques jusqu'aux activités du soin et du care. Et je pense que c'est très important aujourd'hui, ce serait peut-être ma première recommandation en ouverture, d'ouvrir, je dirais, la question de l'intitulé des travailleurs domestiques en reprécisant l'importance que c'est l'ensemble des emplois qui sont au domicile privé des citoyens européens qui doivent être concernés aujourd'hui et pas uniquement, évidemment, mais je crois qu'on est tous d'accord, les activités de ménage. C'est très important pour moi de le rappeler. Ensuite, il y a un deuxième point que je voulais aborder, c'est évidemment cette période particulière, peut-être, nous l'espérons, de sortie de crise sanitaire qui a évidemment mis très fortement en visibilité, en tout cas nous le savons aujourd'hui, tout un ensemble de travailleurs dits de seconde zone qui, pendant la période de confinement dans les différents États européens, ont été présents. Ils ont été présents pourquoi? Parce qu'ils étaient ils étaient des emplois de proximité, et ça, on ne le dira jamais assez, c'est la territorialité, c'est les emplois de forte proximité qui créent aujourd'hui de la solidarité. Et évidemment, les emplois dits domestiques et du care sont par essence des emplois extrêmement de proximité. Et on a bien vu l'accompagnement des personnes âgées, l'accompagnement des familles pendant la période de confinement qui a mis en visibilité ces salariés et ces travailleurs. Ce qu'il faut également dire, et c'est mon troisième point, c'est que le rôle du domicile privé. Je crois qu'en ce début du XXIe siècle, le domicile privé est devenu un acteur de politique publique. Ce domicile privé, il prend de nouveaux rôles et je crois que c'est quelque chose qui est très largement partagé dans l'ensemble des États membres. Au domicile privé, pendant toute cette période de confinement, on y a travaillé. Il y a eu des grands développements du télétravail sur l'ensemble, je dirais, de notre continent européen, mais il y a eu aussi de l'emploi à domicile. Et donc, ce domicile, c'est un lieu de où on part pour travailler et c'est un lieu dans lequel on rentre également pour travailler. Et je crois qu'au-delà de tout ce qui a été dit, il est très important de poser et de questionner le rôle du domicile dans les politiques publiques des États membres avec cette logique de territoire et cette logique de solidarité qui fait émerger le rôle du citoyen comme un acteur majeur sur le plan, je dirais, de l'accompagnement des défis démographiques. Et ce quatrième point des défis démographiques, nous l'avons tous en partage. Il s'agit bien sûr du vieillissement, mais il s'agit aussi des politiques de natalité et également de l'équilibre entre vie professionnelle et vie privée, mais pour terminer, également de l'égalité entre les genres par rapport aux activités au domicile privé, également aux soins qui peuvent être portés avec un déséquilibre très fort vis-à-vis des femmes qui ne peuvent pas toujours rentrer également sur le marché du travail. Dans notre secteur, ce sont aussi des femmes qui emploient des femmes. Quand j'ai dit tout cela, en préambule, je voudrais rappeler les quelques points que nous avons portés dans notre livre blanc européen, que nous avons présenté au moment de la nouvelle mandature européenne en tant que FE, Fédération européenne des emplois de la famille. Nous avons dit 5 choses, et je vais les rappeler, ce seront mes propositions politiques. La première chose, c'est que s'il n'y a pas de prise de conscience des États membres, de chaque État membre européen, qu'il y a un nouveau modèle économique émergent, qu'il s'est, je dirais, renforcé, qu'il s'est rendu visible pendant la crise sanitaire, et que ce modèle économique, ce sont les ménages qui créent aussi de l'emploi, eh bien, je dirais, nous n'avancerons pas au-delà, évidemment, de l'intérêt de la 189. Il faut aujourd'hui que chaque État membre ait, quelle que soit, je dirais, la manière dont il s'y prend, sa liberté est totale dans ce domaine, mais que le principe d'avoir une politique publique qui accompagne l'emploi dans les domiciles privés des citoyens européens est majeur, parce que ce n'est que par ce principe premier que nous obtiendrons la première, je dirais, évidence, qui est la déclaration. Si un salarié, un travailleur n'est pas déclaré, il ne peut pas obtenir de droits sociaux, il n'existe pas, il n'existe même pas encore dans la statistique européenne, je le rappelle, pour les travailleurs domestiques. Le premier donc, enjeu, c'est permettre un système déclaratif pour que chaque ménage puisse facilement et simplement déclarer un salarié, même pour quelques heures de travail par semaine. C'est la base de la mise en œuvre des droits sociaux. Un travailleur non déclaré est un travailleur qui n'existe pas. Le deuxième enjeu, évidemment, c'est d'accompagner le coût de l'emploi déclaré. Et il me semble qu'il faut que le travail déclaré coûte moins cher pour les ménages européens que le travail non déclaré. Nous avons beaucoup parlé lors du panel précédent de tous ces enjeux migratoires. Tout ça conforte l'idée que dans l'espace européen aujourd'hui, les ménages doivent comprendre que déclarer son salarié, au-delà évidemment de la partie légale du sujet, c'est aussi économiquement plus intéressant. Et qu'à partir du moment où je peux déclarer facilement, où j'ai quelques facilités économiques pour solvabiliser mon emploi, comme n'importe quelle entreprise finalement, eh bien je vais rentrer dans un modèle vertueux. Le troisième point, c'est les droits sociaux des salariés. Agir pour donner des droits sociaux aux salariés, cela veut dire les identifier, ça veut dire qu'ils sont déclarés, et ça veut dire que les États membres ont fait quelques efforts sur ce sujet. C'est par là que nous pourrons professionnaliser et permettre véritablement la création des emplois qui vont accompagner les défis démographiques, mais pas des emplois de seconde zone, des emplois déclarés et de qualité, ça veut dire avec des diplômes, avec de la professionnalisation. Et je terminerai sur un point très important pour nous, c'est que les partenaires sociaux européens ne se préoccupent pas finalement de ces nouveaux travailleurs. Nous n'avons pas obtenu jusqu'à maintenant une véritable prise de conscience que les organisations syndicales européennes puissent comprendre qu'à un moment, tous les travailleurs européens sont dignes d'intérêt, de dialogue social sectoriel et d'accompagnement. Je pense qu'aujourd'hui, en tant que représentante à la fois des employeurs, c'est-à-dire des ménages, et des citoyens salariés, c'est finalement, pour la Fédération européenne, accompagner des citoyens vertueux qui créent de l'emploi déclaré, qui accompagnent les droits sociaux, qui professionnalisent les défis démographiques. Et je pense que c'est par ce dernier point que je vous dirais que l'horizon 2030 des grands défis démographiques, c'est demain matin, que c'est très court et qu'il n'y a plus de temps à perdre. Et donc, je porte confiance à ce nouveau mandat européen, que ce soit au Parlement, à la Commission ou dans les différentes instances, pour que véritablement il y ait une impulsion de prise de conscience que chaque État membre doit agir maintenant. Merci.
Thank you. So you're really calling for taking conscience of this work and of the domestic work, that also the role of families in this respect. And you've recalled the 5 points of the Livre Blanc de votre, from your organization. Thank you very much, Ms. Levaux. And I now invite Mr. Philippe Simons, President of the European Federation for Services to Individuals. And also, please respect your time. Your 7 minutes are for you.
Merci, Liv. Effectivement, je vais intervenir au nom de l'EFSI. L'EFSI qui, au travers de ses membres, est présente dans 22 États européens aujourd'hui. Et donc, ça nous donne un point d'observation et un point d'analyse qui est important pour partager nos convictions et nos observations et nos analyses avec vous. Une première conviction très forte que nous avons à l'EFSI, c'est le fait que le secteur des PHS a une réelle capacité aujourd'hui à créer des emplois à long terme et à créer des emplois non reconnaissants.
Excuse me, Philip. Sorry for interrupting you. Because we are hearing louder your voice than the interpreter's voice. Can you make sure you are on the French channel, please, in interpretation? Or sorry for this.
I'm looking for... I'm looking interpretation, yes, sorry.
Yes, when you go into interpretation, you should be, if you're speaking in French, you should be on the French channel.
Okay, is it okay now?
I don't know, can we hear the interpreter?
No, I'm on the French channel, sorry.
Yes, perfect, now it's working perfectly. Thank you very much, Philippe. Merci beaucoup.
Parfait, désolé pour ce démarrage. Donc, la première conviction que nous voulions partager avec vous était le fait que le secteur des PHS avait une vraie capacité à avoir un impact sur le marché de l'emploi en niveau primaire, en créant des emplois à long terme et des emplois non relocalisables pour des personnes qui sont souvent au départ sans emploi, peu qualifiées ou migrantes, comme on l'a vu récemment, et en particulier pour des femmes. Ça, c'est le premier effet. Le deuxième effet, c'est qu'en créant de la qualité de vie, notamment en respectant l'équilibre work-life balance, on peut aussi avoir un effet fondamental sur le marché de l'emploi. Une deuxième observation, et c'est celle-ci que je vais développer davantage encore pendant mon intervention, c'est que les marchés dans lesquels nous voyons les PHS se développer avec succès sont des marchés où 3 acteurs interviennent en collaborant activement. Les 3 acteurs sont les États, on en a parlé, on a besoin de l'aide, du soutien, mais aussi de l'organisation fournie par les États. Les syndicats, parce que tout l'aspect des travailleurs est fondamental pour qu'un marché se développe, et les employeurs, quelle que soit leur nature, il faut que les employeurs jouent le jeu également. Et quand on a ces 3 acteurs qui travaillent de concert, qui travaillent intelligemment ensemble, on arrive à avoir des marchés qui se développent de façon harmonieuse, et parmi les 22 pays dans lesquels nous sommes présents, nous voyons ceci se produire régulièrement. Alors, quelques impacts de cette collaboration harmonieuse, par exemple, pour combattre le travail non déclaré, c'est clair que les 3 acteurs dont on vient de parler doivent contribuer. Les syndicats, par exemple, peuvent contribuer à valoriser les emplois, à promouvoir les emplois dans le marché sous l'angle des travailleurs. Les États peuvent créer des régulations, peuvent contrôler, peuvent créer les incitants financiers pour que ces emplois non déclarés n'aient plus de raison d'être. Et de la même façon, les entreprises aussi doivent travailler, Madame Levaux l'a souligné précédemment, pour qu'on puisse enregistrer facilement les travailleurs dans le marché et ainsi fluidifier. Et on voit bien que si les 3 acteurs travaillent de concert, l'efficacité sera meilleure. C'est la même chose sur les conditions de travail. Les conditions de travail, c'est un élément fondamental d'attractivité de ce marché et de développement de ce marché. Là aussi, quand les 3 acteurs que j'ai cités travaillent de concert, on a de meilleurs résultats parce qu'on peut conclure des accords collectifs, parce qu'on peut les financer, parce qu'on peut investir dans la formation et le développement des personnes, parce qu'on peut en résultant avoir des jobs de qualité dans ce secteur. Ensuite, la qualité des jobs en général, c'est un élément clé, et là aussi, toutes les parties doivent travailler ensemble, que ce soit au niveau de l'innovation, des normes ou de la sécurité des emplois. Donc, globalement, quand ces 3 acteurs jouent leur rôle, les pouvoirs publics pour réguler, pour organiser, pour contrôler, pour contribuer au financement, les syndicats pour promouvoir les emplois, pour représenter les travailleurs, pour négocier avec les entreprises, et les entreprises également pour promouvoir la qualité, pour rendre le marché efficace, pour jouer leur rôle social, parce qu'elles jouent un vrai rôle social pour rendre le marché attractif pour les travailleurs. Quand ces 3 acteurs travaillent de concert, on arrive à faire progresser le marché de l'emploi avec un vrai impact en volume quand les financements sont là et quand le marché fonctionne bien, et avec une vraie qualité, parce que notre conviction au niveau de l'EFSI, c'est que les jobs dans le PHS sont des jobs de qualité. Très souvent, ils s'appliquent à des personnes qui sont particulièrement chères aux familles, que l'on parle des enfants quand on est dans le child care, qu'on parle des personnes plus âgées quand on est dans le home care. Et donc, on a fondamentalement un résultat positif pour toutes les parties. Voilà donc le message que nous voulions délivrer au nom de l'EFSI. Merci Liv et merci à tous.
Thank you for highlighting the job creation potential of household services in general, domestic work, how three entities, trade unions, governments, and employers can further promote this to be successful on the labor market. I invite now the next speaker, Olivier Reuting, who is the regional secretary of Uni Global Europe, to take the floor for 6 minutes. I
can't hear.
And you, yeah, we do hear you. Mr. Reuting, please take the floor. You have 6 minutes to give your recommendations, policy recommendations regarding domestic work. We did hear you. You can take the floor, Mr. Reuting. No. May I suggest to the technical panel to... Yes, we hear you.
I'm sorry, I don't have any sound. Can you hear me? Okay, so I continue assuming that you all understand me. Otherwise, you have to give me a sign. So thank you, colleagues, already for the introduction and the first two speakers from F and FC. I mean, Uni Europa as European Services Workers Union and domestic workers are really one key of us. It's really great that we are able to organize this anniversary meeting here for the ILO Convention 189 and bringing really the key stakeholders together on the side of employers, of the institutions, and of the trade unions, of course. What I think is really important to say is a point just made a moment ago, and that is when we talk about this kind of domestic workers, of these workers, it is really about quality jobs. They are essential. They mean something of great importance for their customers. And I think it is much more than customers. I mean, they're a bit part of the family making the world around for those people who employ them. When we talk about how can we support domestic workers, what do we want to achieve? I think it is about, in the first place, ensuring that they can exercise their rights. And that means empowering them and their union. And very important is, that's not enough. It's not about the worker side. It's on the other side of industry as well, is empowering their employers too. So in terms of the recommendation, we are proposing from the side of Uni Europa, there are really three areas for this. And that is organizing our own side that we can do as a trade union. So it's about trade union organizing. Then it's about how do we organize collective bargaining for those workers together.
Now we lost you, unfortunately, Mr. Reuting, and we were just about to hear what was needed for further empowering of trade unions and employers in the field of domestic workers. Any chance?
Our partners are working on. So first of all, on trade union organizing.
Okay.
This is one of our key issues as a trade union, of course, organizing workers so that they can exercise their rights. We are investing a lot of resources in building sectoral structures for the personal household services sectors in Central and Eastern Europe in particular. What we want to do is strengthening unions where they are already present and building unions where they are weak or non-existing. This means for us as unions, that is a work which is extremely intensive in terms of resources, because we have, of course, often one worker per household. So it is very different to organizing strategies in other sectors and industries. That is one of the reasons why we organized the Home Care Day of Action on 23rd of June this year, underlining that these workers are real essential workers and deserve essential rights, including union representation. What we need for this, and there I'm especially looking at the colleagues from the Commission, we need to have support for this work. And there we would like to see from the Commission ESF plus grants available to European partner organizations. So in the context of the ESF plus, that hasn't really worked. So we have to find another way how this work can be supported at the European social partner level, because this is important, because when social partners, employers and trade unions come together, we can circumvent some governments at the national level, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, who are not that excited about having actually social dialogue. That's the first point on our organizing side. The second one is then on collective bargaining. And as we have already heard, there are numerous obstacles to collective bargaining in the personal household services sectors, simply because workers are employed in people's household. It's not a factory where you have a lot of people around. So what is necessary for us is we also need strong employers organization who aggregate and bring together those who employ the workers. We need to strengthen this. What we as unions want to do together with the employer side is really eliminate all those cowboys, those bottom feeders in the market who basically undermine standard and use undeclared work. So we really use social dumping to destroy the sector and the good employers. And that is a lose-lose situation for everyone as well. For this, we need also the commitment of the European level of the Commission to strengthen social partners to bargain collectively. We need more capacities there. And quite frankly, one of the key points that Union Europa is saying is the lowest hanging fruit to enhance collective bargaining is changing public procurement rules. So one of the first steps we are seeking, and we have a campaign running there, is a clear commitment by the European Union, by the Commission, that the rules for public procurement will be changing in the way that there's no public contract without collective agreement. And we all know that in a lot of cases, the financing also of those private personal household services are financed by public money. So that is why the second key point on collective bargaining. And the third one is then on social dialogue at European level. What is quite clear, there is great fragmentation at the national level, and we see this also then, of course, with the consequences for the European level. We need together as social partners so that the Commission really understands how this sector is structured and contributes to the health and well-being of all people in Europe. It cannot be seen as a side story. That is one important message which we also should bring about through this meeting. Next year, we are looking forward to participate in the multi-stakeholder event on ILO Convention 189, and there want to see again, also through the global level, to develop further social dialogue activities. Now, let's also be positive. The Commission has already done a great job in investing resources in our sector where it is already organized. However, if we want to tackle the inequality and make the European Union's pillar of social rights a reality, also for these workers, we need to have a commitment of developing a program with all the stakeholders to input for sectors like the personal household services sector as well. We need to have a clear focus there. We can't just stay there where we have been with the sectors. We need some building up there to do at the European level, and that should be a joint aim of all of us for the next years. I leave it on those three big areas, which is our job as trade unions to organize in the sector, working together with our partners on the employer side to have good collective bargaining structures, and also looking at the Commission making the proper changes to public procurement rules. And thirdly, we need to have a proper conducive structure at European level to support the work we are doing at the national level and local level. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Olivier, and for also summarizing at the end your 3 points and reminding us of the possibility to organize another multi-stakeholder event in 1 year. And hopefully there we can take stock of a few of the realizations on those 3 points that you think are important. So now let me invite Mr. Jim Crow, who is the president of EASPD, the European Association of Service Providers for Persons with Disabilities. Mr. Crow, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Lieve. Good afternoon and bonjour, dear colleagues. I would like, first of all, to thank our honored colleagues for their presentations alongside me, and also to say hello and greet our honored guests for the proceedings who will be speaking shortly, the State Secretary, relevant other important officials. So it's very gratifying to see this engagement from important authorities this afternoon. Yes, I'm James Crow, President of ESPD. I worked in disability services for some 30 years in the UK, and I'm proud to be President of ESPD. We are active in 33 European countries, and we have a membership network that extends to 15,000 service providers across the continent. Our objectives are to improve access to services for disabled people, so that they can lead as independent and as fulfilled lives as possible, to become equal citizens in society, and also to improve the quality of those services. And clearly the debates yesterday and today go to the heart of these matters. I think when you review the 1989 Convention, its objectives, and they do not read as unreasonable in the 21st century. And when you look at the Allied Recommendation 201, it provides an excellent template of minimum standards for domestic workers. But I think that the reality is that despite we value greatly the links with ILO and the collaborations we've had with ILO over the years and today, but it is stark to see that only 32 countries have yet ratified the convention, 8 of those in Europe. And so I think that is a wake-up call to us yesterday and today, to think very seriously about what we ask of national governments and of the European Union. I was privileged to have the opportunity to listen to the previous session about domestic workers and migration, and the evidence that that was provided by those experts is extremely worrying. We have a whole catalogue of evidence there about the way in which the labour force is casualised. The participants in the labour force, particularly if they are migrants, are stigmatized and treated as second-class citizens, and do not benefit from the labour laws and rights that are present for many of their peers working alongside them in the countries that we're considering. So not only is there a bleak picture about the total number of ratifications across Europe of this extremely important convention, but concern about how, in reality, it's working in terms of the casualization of the workforce, low levels of pay, poor employment standards, and exploitation. I say that in the 21st century, that's not tolerable, and actually reduces the quality of services that disabled people and other vulnerable groups receive. I commend many of the things that were said by my previous colleagues in this panel, and particularly the point made by Oliver about public procurement rules. I think really we are at a point now where we should look with confidence to the European Commission and to the Union and to its institutions to seek to raise some of these issues of employment law to ensure that there's a better, a fairer employment of people in this field. So we would urge the Commission particularly to emphasize to member states the need for ratification of this convention and to encourage member states to commit to social dialogue so that domestic actions, domestic work are given the status that they truly deserve. And we all know it's increasingly important, domestic work, in supporting vulnerable and aging sections of our communities. And we really must give, in the 21st century, this field of work the status that it deserves. Thank you very much, Lieve.
Well, thank you, and thank you for recalling that indeed ratification after 10 years still needs to progress if we want to make through this 21st century challenges like for the domestic workers, and also that pointing out some possibilities like working with public procurement rules and others, very clear and defined recommendations for our speakers in the next section of this panel. Let me now invite Mr. Christian Bragason, General Secretary, for his comments, for his recommendations. You have the floor. Efat, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and big thanks to the Alliance for this important and informative event. And thank you for the opportunity to participate here today. We all know that the domestic work sector is a growing industry throughout Europe. The sector is dominated by women that unfortunately are too often undeclared, overworked, underpaid, and without proper protection. The vulnerability of domestic workers have unfortunately been intensified during the pandemic. And as this event has clearly shown, there are many issues that we need to address in coming years. If we want to strengthen the protection of domestic workers for the future. It is clearly not acceptable that in Europe, workers are excluded from existing social protection schemes. They do get wages below minimum wages and are sometimes even in slave-like conditions. This is unfortunately still a reality for hundreds of thousands of domestic workers in Europe. And our primary goal is to bring the domestic workers into the formal labor market, because we believe that's the first step that needs to be taken for us to be able to provide decent work and decent conditions for domestic workers. This is why EFAT for more than 10 years has been working very closely with the IDWF and our affiliates to put the domestic work sector on solid footing in Europe. Together with the other social partners which have spoken here before me, Uni Europa, EPSU, as trade unions and other employer organizations in the social care sectors. We have been working to try to progress the agenda of domestic work in recent years. And we are making some progress, but there is still a lot to be done. And together we will hopefully manage to improve the situation in the coming years. Since our Congress in 2019, we have been building sectoral structures within EFAT. We have been electing new leadership, and we have been recruiting staff to take responsibility for these activities around the domestic work sector. Our primary focus is to support our affiliates to organize domestic workers, just like Uni Europa, Oliver mentioned earlier. We want to build structures, and we need to negotiate collective agreements that protect their rights all across Europe. Our intention is also to strengthen the cooperation between the different trade unions that represent domestic workers. And as I said earlier, we have EPSU, we have EFAT, and we have Uni Europa. And all of us, we need to work together if we want to improve the situation of domestic workers in Europe. Those that are keen to learn more about our work, Kerstin Hovald has in the chat posted a link to our new brochure that we have covered some of the work that we have been doing. and more information can be found on our webpage. So my political message and recommendations are those. In terms of the EU member states, we would like to see that all domestic workers are covered by all EU labor and social legislations, including occupational health and safety regulations. We would like to develop policies together with the EU member states on bringing domestic workers from the shaded part of our societies into the more formal part. We need to guarantee equal rights and protection for all domestic workers, and that shouldn't be any difference whether they work on platforms or not. And here we think that the new EU initiatives, minimum wage directive and regulation of platform workers will be important for the sector in the future. The previous session was on migrant workers, and we've seen that especially the undocumented ones are very vulnerable, and it's really important to pay a special attention to this group. And finally, I would like to say that in the recovery and resilience plans that the EU member states are implementing at the moment, they need to put focus on this sector, as this is a growing sector and a very vulnerable and essential sector for the recovery. Finally, I have a message to the EU institution as well. We would like to see a strong support and guidance from the EU institution to the member states in how they can develop and strengthen their policies in the field of domestic workers. We would like to see and set up sectoral social dialogue, as has already been mentioned by several other speakers before me. And like Oliver mentioned earlier, I think it's also important to give space and support, financial and other support, to the social partners, but also other stakeholders in the sector to further strengthen cooperation, build structures, capacity, and also have a mapping of the sector, because this is a sector that is unfortunately still very much, there is too much unknown about the sector in too many of the member states in Europe. And finally, but not least, the EU institutions really need to make an effort to promote and encourage EU member states to ratify and implement the ILO Convention C189. And I think this is my final words. I think this is what we need to work on in the next years, to try to get more member states to ratify and implement the convention. And thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bragason. And I see there's a long road ahead of working together with the other trade unions. You mentioned EPSU, EFAT, Uni Europe, and that's important at the European level. I'm now also honored to say we have also the international dimension here in our panel with the president of the International Domestic Workers Federations, Ms. Myrtle Whitboy, joining us, and thanks to the internet, this is easy. And you're joining us from South Africa. I invite you to take the floor.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me. For the last 2 days, the presentations were so good. It empowered me even much more. But then I want to ask the question, why did we fight for 3 years for the ILO Convention 189? When we won this convention, what did we want to do with this convention? Why today, after 10 years, only 33 or 34 countries has ratified convention? Domestic workers themselves has fought for this convention. Of course, we had a lot of support. We had a lot of people behind us, but we ourselves has made our voices heard at the ILO. Yes, we fought, we were crucial, we were attacked, everything was done to us, but it did not stop us. Now, 10 years later, we're talking about Convention 189. Somebody asked me one day, why do you connect politics with domestic workers? But is it not because of the political climate that we have become slaves, that we have become domestic workers? So now we've got Convention 189. What happened after that? We had to do something. We formed the IDWF, a strong federation. We shocked the world because it was controlled by women. Yes, we grow. We fought. We cried. We screamed at governments. Today, we're sitting here, we're talking about Convention 189. We're talking about migrant workers. We're talking about the suffering. We're talking about the Cavallo system. We're talking about all of those things that so negatively affect domestic workers. And we are now saying enough is enough. We are saying we listen to political people. We all big shots. We listen to universities, we have research. But the time has come that all these researchers and all the talks that we have must start to work for domestic workers. It must start to shake the governments of the world. The message this afternoon is so clear to this conference of effort. Yes, we want to continue working with effort. Yes, we want to continue build Europe together with all those organizations this afternoon and this 2 days that was there. We want you to put that you make, to put it to practice, to work with domestic workers closely. And let us also hear more the voices of domestic workers. Let domestic workers talk to us. Let domestic workers speak to us. We heard about how domestic workers must leave their children. All of us, we have to leave our children. We sometimes don't even know. So, forward the Convention 189. Let Europe make sure that many more countries ratify Convention 189. We also have to understand, and working together, the COVID-19 pandemic has made such a big impact on the domestic worker sector. Millions of domestic workers are going to lose their jobs. It is there. We have to ensure that domestic in the world understand the gig economy. We have to ensure that domestic workers understand technology. We have to empower domestic workers to speak up for themselves. And the only way that we're going to get more of Convention 189 is that we shake the corridors at that governments. We don't want a convention that's in the desk or under the tables. We want a convention that's open, and all the clauses in the convention must be implemented. We also don't have to forget about 190. If we get Convention 190 and we put it together with 189, we have got such strong recommendations. We can shake the world for domestic workers. So today, like I say, my message to effort is clear. Thank you for what you're doing in Europe. Thank you for working closely with the IDWF for the last 10 years. And thank you for putting this 2 days presentations on the table. And my wish is that when we go forward with effort, when we go forward with the IUF, when we go forward with all the organizations in the world, that we will ensure that justice will be done for domestic workers. We are still going to be for a long time in the COVID-19 pandemic. We have to start looking at how we can have co-ops, how we can support those domestic workers. It's not only right to say, we are going to give you a coupon, we are going to give you groceries. We must empower them to start thinking for themselves. We must empower them to say, this is what my organization wants to do. This is how we want to educate domestic workers. And together in the world, I'm sure that we will, in the next 5 years, we will have much more edifications. I thank you, and I thank you all, and I wish that we will go forward and that we will build a powerful Europe, because building Europe is also building the IDWF. Thank you so much.
Lieve, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wiedboy, for your passionate call for the ratification of C189. And you also made the link to the newest convention, only 2 years old, the Convention on Violence and Harassment in the World of Work, Convention 190. And indeed, they have, when together they're ratified more widely, they will be very strong and empower domestic workers and also employers, families, etc., and make us better societies. So now let me invite the last speaker on the first section of our panel, which is Michel Levoy, Director of PICOM, and PICOM is the platform for international cooperation on undocumented migrants. May I ask you to be to the point for the last 6 minutes of this first round, and then we'll look at the audience responses on the question, what are your recommendations? So we will put that together in one slide, closing this first part of the panel. So Ms. Levoy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Liva. Kind of hard to follow Myrtle. I would have maybe given her a standing ovation, but we're all sitting down. So I just wanted to highlight, first of all, that we're very happy to be co-organizing this with all the partners. And I wanted to focus on migrant domestic workers. So we know from existing data that migrant women do make up a significant part of the workforce in the domestic sector in Europe. ILO estimated in 2013 that roughly 55% of the 4.1 million domestic workers in Northern, Southern, and Western Europe were migrant workers. So that's approximately 1.8 million women migrant domestic workers. And although that data wasn't disaggregated by migration status, we also know, we've heard repeatedly, that many are undocumented. When the ILO convention was adopted 10 years ago, the EU Fundamental Rights Agency also released a report, a landmark report on irregular migrants. And one of the reports was actually on irregular migrant domestic workers. And the FRA noted at the time that regularization is actually a source of data on undocumented migrant domestic workers. And we heard this actually in the last panel which looked also at regularization of domestic workers in Switzerland. We also know from the regularization in Italy in 2020 that 85% of the applicants for this regularization program were from domestic workers, so representing nearly 177,000 undocumented domestic workers. So at this two-day event, we've been looking at various challenges in upholding the rights of domestic workers, but we wanted to highlight the specific and intersectional discrimination that migrant domestic workers face because of their gender, their migration status, and work. And we know that there's various policy changes that we need to look at, and I wanted to highlight two. So one is the complaints mechanisms, and the second is regular pathways. The first one on complaints mechanisms. Migrant workers who are undocumented are dependent if they have a permit that makes them dependent on their employer. So if they wish to complain about their treatment or if they engage with labor inspection authorities and try to exercise their rights as workers, they could be deported. This can also be the same for migrant domestic workers who are undocumented and who are victims of crime by their employers. Here I wanted to highlight the case of Cristiane Fernandes. She was a 30-year-old undocumented Brazilian woman, a mother of 2 children. She died in Belgium on the 12th of May from cervical cancer, which had developed because she was raped multiple times by her employer in her workplace. The Domestic Workers League of the CSA Brussels are calling on the Belgian government to provide residence and work permits and access to services for victims of abuse. But we need collectively to urgently redress an ingrained imbalance across this continent, that immigration enforcement is currently the top priority rather than labor rights and victim protection. We don't feel that migrant workers should be deported just because they're seeking help or just because they want to enforce their rights as workers or as victims. Effective labor complaints mechanisms are crucial to enforce labor rights in this sector, but especially in domestic work because of the limited mandate the labor inspectors have for private household. So we recommend that enforcing labor and victims' rights for all workers should be upheld, regardless of their migration status. Domestic domestic workers should be able to file a complaint against their employers and access remedy without risking immigration enforcement. And the second and last point that I want to highlight is ensuring labor migration pathways that promote decent work and social inclusion. So we've heard briefly on the figures. Roughly speaking, 1 out of 2 domestic workers across Europe are migrants. Yet it's still very difficult for non-EU nationals to access a work permit to work as domestic workers. And this was highlighted also in the previous panel. Why is this so? Because of a lack of recognition, a lack of value of domestic workers' work, a bias in migration policy on both the EU and the national level that predominantly focuses on highly skilled labor migration. Within PICUM, we mapped out 17 countries, and we found that only 4, Cyprus, Malta, Poland, and Portugal, had relatively accessible opportunities for non-EU nationals to get a work permit for domestic work. And why are these so difficult? Why is it so difficult to obtain these work permits for domestic workers? It's because of labor market tests, income thresholds, quotas, policies where permits might only be accessible for nationals of certain countries, complicated rules both for workers and employers, permits that might be available for a limited amount of time. They might be linked to a particular employer, so it makes it hard to change employers even when people are abused. So in this context, it's very common for migrant workers to have a status which makes them dependent on their employer or to work irregularly and undeclared. And once they are undocumented, they have a lot of difficulties to regularize their status based on being employed in domestic work. And this creates dependency and a decent work deficit. So therefore, we recommend that it's crucial that the value of domestic work and the role of migrant domestic workers is recognized through expanding labor migration and regularizing pathways for domestic workers. Domestic workers should be able to get work permits at the national level that promote autonomy, that promote decent work and social inclusion under general work permit schemes. And with inadequate public services and policies that ensure work-life balance, European households are increasingly relying on precarious migrant domestic workers to facilitate equal participation in the labor market and to meet care needs and household obligations. So to conclude, we will never achieve gender equality at the expense of migrant women. We need to promote and prioritize policies that promote decent work for all domestic workers and to center the voices and the needs of migrant domestic workers in our efforts. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Michelle. And duly noted, decent work for all domestic workers, so also including migrant domestic workers. And just a note for our audience, tomorrow the ILO will issue its 3rd report on global migration. So we can look at a renewal or new figures of women migrant workers in domestic works. So that would, there is no link yet to share because it's only up tomorrow. But let me now look at, with all these recommendations that all of the 7 speakers have given, let me now look at some of the recommendations that our participants are giving. And we had a good share of participants that responded and shared their one key word on what should be focused on. And if we look at the slide, we see a lot of these words like affordability, capacity building, formalization, freedom of negotiation, and I see other words like undeclared, coming from undeclared, going to declared. So these are all are areas to be focused on. If we look at EU-wide initiatives, that would make a difference. That would make the gaps in implementation closer and not wider. And ratification is also among those words. So now let me ask a second question for the next mentee to our participants. What is your takeaway of this session? So these are your main takeaways, and these are already answered, I see. So we are sharing slavery, collaboration, cohesion among actors, initiatives. Those are your takeaways: organizing, dialogue, and useful. So this event is useful. But especially the convention on C198 is, C189 is useful. Now let's hear from EU stakeholders, distinguished guests from different angles that we will invite for the second round in our panel. From the Slovenian presidency, we have with us the State Secretary, Mr. Sveto Ribek, from the Ministry of Labor, Family Affairs and Equal Opportunities. So welcome. We also have with us Evelyn Regner, who is the member of European Parliament and chair of the FAM Committee of the European Parliament. We'll also have with us Cynthia Del Rio from the Workers Group in the European Economic and Social Committee, and from a member of the SOC section there. We have Jan Willem Godrien, General Secretary of EPSU, the European Federation of Public Services. And finally, we have also from the European Commission, Jordi Curell, Director for Labour Mobility and International Affairs. So I will open the floor for you to comment and maybe make also some responses to the policy recommendations that were given, and your impressions of these 2 days event and how to build forward to make sure Convention 189 is ratified and implemented in the EU and beyond. So let me first invite State Secretary Sveto Ribek to take the floor. You have 6 minutes, State Secretary, and here you go. Thanks.
Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, hello. Firstly, I would like to say thanks for all your contributions at today's conference. We have paid close attention and heard all your suggestions to make better solutions for domestic workers. As you know, Slovenia hasn't yet decided to ratify the convention. Nevertheless, at this point, I would like to emphasize that in Slovenia, domestic workers are not excluded from labor market protection or treated differently from any other workers. Provisions of the Employment Relationships Act also apply to domestic workers. All rights arising from the employment relationship also apply to domestic workers such as, including the obligation to conclude an employment contract in writing, restrictions on working hours, prohibition of sexual or other harassments or harassments at work, obligations to ensure safe working conditions, the obligation to protect the dignity of the employee at work, and the obligation to protect and respect and protect the employee's privacy. The employer is obliged to pay equal pay for equal work. Regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, we note that Slovenia has adopted a number of interventional measures in the legislative field with the aim of mitigating and eliminating the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. The measures were aimed at protecting and maintaining employment, covering all workers in the employment relationship. That means that intervention measures were also available to domestic workers under the same conditions as to others. I would like to emphasize that the provisions of the Minimum Wage Act and the Occupational Safety and Health Act also apply to domestic workers. Domestic workers also have the same access to complaints, mechanisms, and means to ensure compliance with the law as all other workers. To continue, domestic workers are also entitled to full range of social security rights, including maternity, as are all other workers working in an employment relationship. It should also be pointed out that foreigners who are employed in accordance with the legislation of the Republic of Slovenia are equal and treated same as Slovenian citizens. We also have the minimum age limit for concluding an employment contract at 15 years, and workers who have not yet reached 18 years of age enjoy special protection in the employment relationship. To sum up, the protection provided by the existing legal order in Slovenia provides full protection to the category of domestic workers. Nevertheless, the convention is open for ratification, so in the event of changed circumstances, information from the field of initiatives of social partners to ratify, we will of course re-examine the need for ratification of the convention. To conclude, Slovenia will also, during its presidency of the Council of the European Union, strongly advocate for ensuring quality work for life quality of all workers, including of domestic workers. The general objectives of the Slovenian presidency will focus, among others, on mitigating the social and economic consequences of the crisis and on contribution to the improvement of the working and living conditions of all generations and of all workers. It remains of paramount importance that we ensure to all workers, including domestic workers, safety and health at work, that we strengthen the relevant skills of all workers, that we create the conditions for reconciling professional and private life, and that we ensure adequate pay for work. An inclusive recovery and advocate social protection of well-being of all is and has to remain at the heart of a fair and social Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, State Secretary, for your intervention and also for saying that you're open to re-examine the ratification in collaboration with the social partners of the Republic of Slovenia, and also for pointing out the impact of COVID-19 and the importance of safety and health at the workplace for all workers, including domestic workers. So we look forward to the presidency and with the focus on social and inclusiveness in Europe. Now let me invite, and please stay with us. I am anticipating that maybe some questions may arise from the participants. We have a member of the European Parliament and chair of the Committee of Women's Rights and Gender Equality, FEM, with us, Ms. Evelyn Regner. May I invite you to comment and give your takeaways of this event. Ms. Regner, you have the floor.
An excellent good afternoon. Thank you very much for organizing this event. 91% of the domestic workers are women, so it's really a women's issue. I mean, I say 91% as far as we can check it out. So a lot is hidden and not declared, but as far as we can really have an overview on the figures. And these women are invisible. Not all of them, but just today, I am an Austrian member of the European Parliament. A study was revealed and it was shown that in general, the public, the society appreciates less this sort of work that is hardly visible. And what does that mean? That means less pay. That means less appreciation of what has been achieved, what the work was, as the work was done. And of course, it's the self-confidence of those working in these sectors that are so invisible, yeah, is of course far more little. And this is an unlucky combination, not to be seen to be invisible or less visible than in many other jobs. So behind doors, domestic workers, so somehow they don't have this possibility to unite, to exchange. And on the other side, the vast majority women. And these in sectors that are traditionally seen as sort of cooking, cleaning, care work is something anyway one does for free, because who's doing it normally? It's the wife who is doing that, who's caring about the kids, about the elderly. It's this sort of jobs that was in the more or less in the whole history always regarded as something that's in the full package when somebody is in a family. And then when you're doing these sort of jobs, you just already have a very difficult start in the work life. And therefore, really congratulations that we have today this event. Some figures you might all know. About 75.6 million people are domestic workers. And the working conditions and salaries are poor. Still about 36% are excluded from labor laws and social security. And the defining characteristic is that the work takes place in or for a private household, and this brings special challenges. All this you know very well when working on Convention 189, who is really of major importance because so many people, above all, so many women in the world are getting this appreciation via a convention and are made more visible, though so few member states have implemented it so far. But nevertheless, some improvement has happened, although only 32 states have ratified the convention so far, and 20,000 domestic workers joined a union. So somehow let's also talk about these modest success, though we know we have to go far further. And now we just look at all this background of the Convention 189, where, of course, my job as a member of the European Parliament is also to push and to make visibility and to push those member states who still always find a reason why not to ratify it, why not to implement it, that we are pushing it because it's really a question of social justice and something that especially all those working women merit. Now we have COVID-19. What COVID-19 was doing with women in general, I mean, of course, most of them, it was the women carrying all this burden. I mean, cooking, carrying, I mean, you all know these stories. And domestic workers then are exposed even more. I mean, we just saw 5 to 20% lost their jobs during the pandemic. And so somehow even all this, what is already quite tough enough, was even tougher. So inequalities were sharpened. Those who somehow were at the other side of the privileges, so having a hard life even had it harder. The biggest hurdle, as I said in the beginning, is the invisibility of domestic works. Issues are those of atypical and undeclared work, migration, integration. So Myrtle and so many others were really putting it very well on the table. So it shows we have seen that a formalization is urgently needed in order to secure decent work and conditions as well as safeguards in times of crisis. Domestic workers are key in our care economy, and therefore I would like to link them very much. First of all, domestic work also covers sometimes and often care work, but also the importance of this care work that is sometimes not paid at all. So somehow this is all linked together. And therefore, when we were just looking in the European Parliament in the FAM committee, we just said we have to have a big focus on the care work and to work on this whole area. If we invest 2% of the GDP in care, we could create 1.5 million jobs in the European Union, well-paid jobs with good working conditions, including for domestic care. And this could also help closing the gender pay and the gender pension gap. I bring that on the table because it's especially those care workers who are doing sometimes those caring about elderly coming from remote areas of the European Union, and of course being also heavy on the pressure, and of course also suffering on not getting the minimum wage. So in order to go further on, I would like also to mention the minimum wage. This is also an important tool we have, and we should push forward, because here we just see especially those in domestic work would really go forward, and this would be really an improvement. And of course, what is the last thing I would like to say? My 6 minutes are almost over. I mean, we can only do the utmost in order to push as many members to ratify, and not only ratify, also to apply, to implement the Convention 189. It's a good convention, it deserves it, and what I learned so far, you always find a legal reason, something in the background if you don't want to. So I urge and I push the whole European Union to do it so, and insofar it just can also just support all those trade unionists and all those who were really making the best advertisement for the Convention 189. So thanks for listening, and looking forward to questions and exchange.
Ms. Regner, and great to be counting on you in the FEM committee and across the parliament in other committees like the Employment Committee, of which you're also a member, and also underlining the potential on job creation, on care work in general, and finally also your call for more ratifications of C189 in the world, but especially also in the EU, as there we have 8 countries ratifying so far. So let me now turn to the European Economic and Social Committee, an important institution alongside the presidency, the parliament and the commission. In the European Economic and Social Committee is the SOC section, and we have Cynthia Del Roy with us, joining us from Italy, I assume, where you are also a trade union responsible person. Of course, let me give you the floor for your 6 minutes and hear from you what your takeaways are and what you like to achieve. And I call on our technicians to see if one mic which is open can be muted. I mute myself in the first place. Yes, thanks.
Thank you very much, Liv, and thank you very much for inviting the Economic and Social Committee. I'm the Vice President of the SOC section for the Workers Group, and I'm very grateful to be here. I was in the ILC 10 years ago. I was a member of the ILO governing body, and I participated to the discussions in this tripartite ILO commission. So I'm particularly glad to be here to evaluate progress, but also shortages and the ways forward for this convention. You were asking which are the takeaways from this event. Well, I think we all share that domestic workers, including millions of migrant workers, need protection by the same basic rights available to other workers, putting an end to exploitation and abuse because of their systematic exclusion from national labor laws or lack of these labor laws and non-recognition of human rights. But I think that we have to move from strong messages to actions, because there is also a very worrying picture coming out of this 2 days discussion about Europe. And Europe is the social Europe, where we are all committed to recognize fundamental rights. There is the majority of domestic workers in Europe still lack access to decent working and living conditions, fulfillment of human and labor rights, because there is also not only the alarming signal that only 9 countries have ratified the convention, but there is a widespread non-compliance with national laws, even in the countries where there are laws, labor laws. So another alarming signal is that according to the report of the European Commission and in the ILO report, which is excellent by the way, 1/3 of the victims of human trafficking in Europe are domestic workers. This is not acceptable in Europe. This is not acceptable at all. And the COVID-19 has been underlined by previous speakers, has worsened the situation with higher job losses among domestic workers in informal employment. Therefore, being in informal employment, they have no access to income support or other emergency measures which have been adopted by national governments. Particularly difficult is the situation of live-in domestic workers and migrant domestic workers, who are very often invisible, as Ms. Regner was underlined, and therefore more vulnerable to threats and exploitation because they are blackmailed. The EC has adopted an opinion in 2016 on highlighting the labor and social conditions of live-in care domestic workers, raising concrete proposals and actions. But Europe has some tools. We need to strengthen these tools and how we can better use these tools. First of all, the European platform against undeclared work. Besides collecting data on domestic workers, could cooperate with the European Labour Authority to monitor the causes of non-compliance and work more closely with national labour inspectors. Recruitment and placement practices have to be monitored with clear requirements. Cooperation among EU countries and inspectorates is critical also to intercept labor human trafficking of migrants. We have already said the strong need for a strong commitment of the European institution for the ratification of the convention, not only 189, but also 190. I put the two together, only my country ratified in Europe. But so I don't come on this, but this is very crucial. But we need a strong commitment by the Commission, not only an encouragement. This is what I want to underline. But we need to ensure that in all our countries, there is an open access to an efficient complaint mechanism for the victims of exploitation or non-compliance, providing avenues for domestic workers to bring complaints and measures to protect them from reprisals, because they are blackmailed. So we need to smooth, and the trade unions are offering services in this context. So I fully support what the European federations underlined. We also need to put in place firewall procedures and policies to prevent such cases. The ad hoc EEC Committee on Fundamental Rights and Rule of Law can give a support in this sense. We can work in this area. Also, access to protection and remedy instruments could be shared at European level. We could share some instruments, because there is no clear, transparent, and affordable way to access to protection and remedy instruments. And ensuring access to justice is a fundamental right that that has to be recognized to all citizens in Europe. Then, of course, collective bargaining and social dialogue, because the aim is to formalize domestic workers. Therefore, the top priority is the transition from informal to formal work, because we can recognize representation of these workers, recognize labor rights, social security, health and safety provisions and access to services only if they are formal and visible, as we said. Also in this area, we can help as Economic and Social Committee to share the best practices of collective agreements and experiences. My final remark is the need to invest in the care sector, mainly covered today by domestic workers and mainly women. But we have to be aware of the risk to cuts to public services and social protection systems, which could push care users to organize care by themselves without any professionalization. So care services should be professionalized, investing in targeted care skills, as other colleagues said, and recognition of qualifications around Europe. The Economic and Social Committee has worked a lot on skills, but we can focus better on a specific proposal on the recognition and portability of care skills around Europe in order to give more visibility to this very important job. And also domestic work in this way could be a source of quality employment in our society. I would like to thank for the opportunity to address this conference, and also we are ready to work on a common agenda of initiatives and actions at European level as organization of the civil society represented in the Economic and Social Committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Del Rio, for sharing your commitment and for continuing your commitment, which started with the negotiations on the convention itself, which accumulated in the adoption 10 years ago, and which you continue within the EESC. And I take away from your contribution that we indeed have this convention, but we should also use all the tools that are available for all institutions, and that everyone can join in. You mentioned the European platform, you mentioned other ways for the Commission to intervene, but also for the EESC reaching out to all organizations to share practices on domestic workers, better regulation, better practices, etc. And the last one was on the portability of the skills and investing in the care sector. So thank you so much for your contribution. It will sure inspire others. And let me now turn to Jan-Willem Godriaan, General Secretary of the European Federation of Public Services, EPSU. Ms. Godriaan, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Dank je, Lieve. Everybody, I represent EPSU. EPSU is the European Federation of Public Service Unions. We represent about 8 million workers in all forms of care, public, non-profit, social economy or private sector employers and other public services. Greetings to all the participants, my union comrades, to our partners, government, parliament and commission officials, and there were excellent contributions, very rich, and I think a joint and shared agenda for change and improvement for domestic workers is emerging here. Many of our affiliates support domestic workers who are doing care jobs. Examples are our German union Verdi, who supported a case of Bulgarian care workers, and they won a case for unpaid working time, or in Switzerland a similar case. So one of the things we see is that domestic care workers do fill a gap in delivering public services and care, and therefore they need to be properly recognized by the member states and protected. Several speakers refer to the gap in public service delivery being caused by privatization, lack of investment, austerity measures, and it also makes the sector overall vulnerable to shocks such as the pandemic, and underlines how ill-prepared the sector is also to cope with the predicted aging of the European population. I was struck by the fact that the slide you presented from the participants is that they raise care and affordability as key issues. And that to me means that the role of the state at all relevant levels, including municipal and including in funding and provision, needs to be strengthened. Now there is positive news. We are getting more recognition. The recently endorsed report of the report of the Commission and the Social Protection Committee on long-term care was endorsed by the Council, and it echoes many of the demands made by EPSU and other unions in support for improved working conditions, collective bargaining, adequate levels of staffing, as well as increased investment also in the broader care sector. We heard from Petra Ezzedine and others how heavily reliant the domestic care worker is on migrant workers, and you have migration outside and inside the EU. And we know from our affiliates, and I think Myrtle and Michelle from PICAM refer to this, that some of those workers have working conditions close to slavery, and that is what we should work incredibly hard to abolish and prevent that from happening. For many of the care workers who come, especially from outside of the EU, domestic care is a first step in a career in the care sector, long-term and other care sectors. And it is therefore crucial to recognize also working qualifications, also when they come from outside of the EU, and in general, and several speakers addressed it, to have a better professionalization of the sector for the benefit also of the people we care for. A number of points for the European level. I mean, I support what many others have said, and Jim from EASPD mentioned it as well, that the Commission can do much more to encourage the member states to ratify the ILO Convention. We also need to understand that care is, including domestic care, is a highly qualified area of work with a focus on the human being, and it requires levels of qualification and professionalization which we can support together. It means also formalizing and funding the care sector. Many have already spoken about working conditions, health and safety, working time, the importance of collective agreements, and I can only support what has been said in that regard. Regularization of domestic workers and domestic care workers is important to ensure that they have the status of employee and not being self-employed on precarious working conditions. I think again, Michelle from PICAM was very strong on this. Christian, Oliver have raised the issue of access to trade union rights, collective bargaining rights. I saw also a comment of an employer in the chat channel in this regard. So this is certainly something we are strongly supporting. I echo also points raised by some that there is a task for us as unions to organize workers in this group and to strengthen their collective voice at their workplace. The EU, the European Commission, in the Principle 18 of the European Pillar of Social Rights, expressly states that everybody has the right to affordable care of good quality, and the European Commission should include, for example, living care workers in its action plan on long-term care to be published next year, also to ensure that those workers get good pay and conditions. The European Labour Authority has been addressed by several speakers. We support that the European Labour Authority, especially in cross-border situations like posted living care workers between Poland and Germany and other Central and Eastern European countries and Western European countries, can do much more here. Evelyn raised the issue of the gender issues of this work. The 90% or 91%, I think Evelyn mentioned, of domestic workers are women. So this needs to be something we have to focus on together, but also for the European Commission and the Council to work on. I want to support, and then I'll almost finished. I want to support what several speakers have mentioned with regard to public procurement. Why should we give public funding to employers who do not respect collective bargaining, who do not want to engage with their trade unions and with their workforce in bargaining? That is an abuse of public funding, and that we should not allow. And I agree with other speakers who said that this should be a conditionality also in the light, for example, of the European Recovery and Resilience funds which are being used. A point which has not been raised by previous speakers, there is the debate on the preparedness of the health and the care sector against new pandemics and to improve resilience, this EU Health Union debate. We also need to ensure that there is a focus on living care workers, also to improve their working conditions and overall care delivery. Finally, in the long term, we need to eliminate, we think, living care arrangements, those arrangements which are close to modern slavery. That we cannot tolerate, and for that we need to invest in public services, in long-term care, other care forms, to ensure that care recipients can have access to care homes, to non-residential care. And that is certainly also an agenda we want to work on with all the colleagues here present. As I said, from this debate, a joint and shared agenda is emerging, and I hope it will not take us 10 years before we see all the countries in the EU implementing the ILO Convention 189. Also, that remains a key task for us. Thank you very much, and look forward to work with all of you on a broad agenda.
Well, thank you, Jan Willem, for your contribution and for nicely picking up different recommendations of the different speakers and kind of linking them together and adding some special focus as well, given your organization. And I take away the fact that we need to be prepared and more resilience within the sector should another pandemic hit us again, or this one flare up again, because we're not out of it yet entirely, unfortunately. So let me now turn to Jordi Curel. Jordi, you're the Director on International Affairs and Labor Mobility, and you have been the Interim Director of ELA, the European Labour Authority, during the setup phase. So you're very well positioned to share with us your comments and your views on the many recommendations that have been given. And certainly many panelists have underlined also the good work that has been done and the many tools that are already available and how to use them even more and leverage them. So we really look forward to hearing from you, where you within the Commission DG Employment would envisage the clauses of Convention 189. Where would we stand in, let's say, 5 years? What will you do? Thanks for sharing that with us.
Thank you very much, Lieve, and thanks to all the panelists for their very clear interventions. And indeed, most of the recommendations that we have heard today, they are challenging, but they are all pretty right. I mean, those are the things that we need to do in order to make sure that through the implementation of the Convention 189, we really improve the situation of domestic workers. I will start a bit randomly with the different kind of recommendation that we have been listening to very carefully. The first one I would say is about recognizing the importance of good quality personal and household services. And this is very important to give enough visibility to this phenomenon. I mean, it seems to me that, if I can speak like that, that in political terms, in terms of action, if a phenomenon is not visible, then it doesn't call the attention of citizens, it doesn't call the attention of politicians, and therefore there is less action. So the first thing, in my view, and that has been repeated over and again by the panelists, is to make sure that the role of this kind of work, of domestic work, is really brought to the fore. And I think that in this, it's necessary to make sure that we make everybody aware of the fact that this kind of workers support families, they support people with disabilities, dependent people like older people, etc., etc. And we know that in our society, at least in the EU, this collective is growing. Second thing, they do provide job opportunities for workers who are very often underrepresented in the labor market, like women, we said that also over and again, like migrant workers and also low skilled. And then, of course, they contribute to improve the work-life balance and gender equality on the side of the users, because very often this work-life balance, this improved gender equality is done at the expenses of the own workers' work-life balance or gender equality improvement. So I think that this is important. And on that, I will not mention everything that we have been doing at the EU level, because many of the things have been mentioned. We issued a green paper this year in January on aging in order to launch notably a discussion on how to address the challenges regarding the rising demand of long-term care. We also issued a report on the implementation of the Work-Life Balance Directive. And then I think there are two fundamental points that have also been mentioned. The first one is the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights and its action plan. And indeed, one of the previous speakers referred to the pillar principle, which deals with that. And also very importantly, because that was also something which was said in the first panel, the importance of EU funding to that kind of in this area. And I think that my colleague from DG Reform presented this morning some of the possibilities of funding in this area. So that would be, in my view, the first point, to make this issue visible, so as politicians and then administrations act upon it. The second thing I would say is the rights. I mean, we need to make sure that domestic workers are treated like workers. And this is fundamental. And I think that in this area, we, from the Commission, and of course, this has been endorsed and enacted by Parliament and by Council, who are the co-legislators, we have proposed, and this has been endorsed, directives on different areas. I think that one which is very fundamental is the directive on more transparent and predictable working conditions, because again, in order to benefit from the rights, these rights need to be known. The other point which is important is the access to social protection, and again, this was mentioned by some of the speakers before. The career path that these domestic workers have is such that if we don't adapt social protection systems to their more irregular career life, I would say, they will not benefit from social protection, and same thing for minimum wage. And I think that this is very, very important. That's about the rights. We'll come in a second to the enforcement of those rights, which is also equally important. The third area I would like to refer to, because it has been raised very often in the previous interventions, is about the transition from undeclared to declared work. And this is very fundamental as well. And well, you know that Parliament and Council several years ago decided to install the European platform tackling on the undeclared work, and which I had the honor to chair, as a matter of fact. Now this platform has moved on to ELA, but I think it has done an important job. And I think the commitment of, in particular, member states within the platform has been fundamental. And then again, we have been looking a bit less to the legal angle of the issue and more at the incentives angle of the issue. So we have done, I think, in collaboration with member states, but even more importantly, with social partners, both industry side and workers' representatives, a campaign last year in which, by the way, the European Labour Authority also participated, which was called EU for Fair Work. And I think it was important to make everybody aware of the fact that undeclared work is bad for everyone. It's bad for the worker, of course, but it's also bad for those employers who do respect the rules because they are confronted to unfair competition, and it's also, of course, damageable for public authorities because they lose revenues by not being able to get social contributions or taxes on that kind of work. And I think that apart from that, there was an important body of research, I would say, both about the mapping. Someone referred to this word earlier in the intervention, mapping of this phenomena of undeclared work with a particular, not exclusive, but a particular emphasis on domestic work, and also on successful initiatives that have been taken at member states level in order to accompany through incentives from the undeclared situation to the declared one. And I think that, again, this is an important one. And of course, within that, it's fundamental, and I would say that it's a bit in the ADN of the European Union and its member states, it's social dialogue. I think that this has been said also very frequently in the previous interventions, and we do believe that social dialogue and social trade unions and social partners at large, trade unions and employees of organizations have a crucial role. And the crucial role, I think it can be seen twofold. First of all, is also about awareness raising. It's about protection of rights. And again, this boils down to enforcement and the contribution that social partners can make to enforcement. But it's also about establishing the right rules for making sure that social dialogue is actually promoted and collective bargaining is also promoted. Let me just mention incidentally that the public procurement directives of the European Union foresee that the public authorities have to ensure that all contractors and respect, amongst other things, a list of ILO conventions, including which we have the Convention on Freedom to Associate and the Convention on Collective Bargaining. So there is a very clear incentive also in that area in order to promote social dialogue in reality. Of course, we have also done things like specific projects which have been funded by us together with you, with ILO, in order to promote social dialogue in this specific sector, which is, and I think that all of you who are very active in this area, of course, know the specificities about social dialogue in this area, which is by definition a very fragmented area. So organization is a bit more complex. So, and then finally, I would refer, of course, to a thing which encompasses all these actions, which is the promotion, notably through ratification of the Convention 189. And then again, in 2013, there was a council decision adopted in order to pave the way for member states to ratify the conventions. And we, as you said, Lieve, and as many other speakers said before, we very heartily, warmly recommend member states to ratify this convention as soon as possible, because indeed it will contribute to make the situation of these workers much better. Of course, all of that is about what should the reality look like. Now we have the issue of enforcement, and we have been referring to areas, and in particular to trafficking, to forced labor, and notably when we're talking about women, migrant women who come to the EU in particular in order to work in this area, etc., whose rights are not respected. And this is the real issue. Often we may have the best legislation, the best legal framework, but if those rights are not properly enforced, then we have an issue. And that's why, that's one of the reasons for the creation of ELA. Of course, ELA is only active or is only competent in the area of the EU acquis on free movement of workers, of course. But it does have an impact in making labor inspections work together. And we know for a fact that many of the situations involving abuse from domestic workers entail a cross-border dimension. So we count a lot on ELA in order to supplement member states' effort. But we should not forget and that's implicit in what I'm saying, that the real role for enforcement of of anti-trafficking, labor law abuse, etc., is for member states. And that's why member states should step up its efforts in making sure that labor inspectorates are properly staffed in order to make sure that all the provisions are respected. So again, I'm very grateful for this event, and as we are concerned in the Commission, it's very useful for us to get in touch with the reality, I would say, with people who have been working on the ground or who are the real politicians, in order to be attuned with the needs and the realities, and to be able, where necessary, to adjust our actions. So again, thanks a lot for this event, and thanks a lot for all your interventions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Curel. And as an observer, I'm moderating this, but I'm also observing. You said, let me randomly touch upon what has been said, but you followed a very logical framework. You started with visibility and explained how we need to look at the reality and listen to each other and see the job creation potential that this sector offers. Then you said we need rights and legislation. We need further than to, and you said which were already the steps taken by the European Union and in the Commission in particular, whether it be legislative or more policy making. And then you explained the tools, the action that is needed, using the funds, but using social dialogue and fostering that, even though this is a difficult sector and it is very specific with all its fragmentation. And if all of this is available but doesn't work, you always need that closing element, which is the enforcement, and where you also explained what ELA can do and how the platform, the European platform of undeclared work, has evolved in something that's stronger. But this is not just ELA, it's also the European member states in its public investment that needs to be made and continued in labor inspectorate that has the capacity to sometimes find that one domestic worker that is hidden and maybe in a situation of abuse. And that's exactly what we need to ban in the future. So all these elements are important, and you have underlined them. And there is a road ahead to improve, and especially also on the ratification, where you made a strong call, referring to the Commission's own proposal and recommendation that was endorsed by the co-legislators to call upon the member states to ratify Convention 189. Now, let me turn to the last slide with the words of the audience, their takeaways from this event. And there are many words popping up. Some of them are unfortunately not readable to me, but the biggest one is dialogue, social dialogue, collaboration. Go forward. Equality is another one, and yes, many challenges ahead, but also urgency, and I think that also refers to what we have seen with the pandemic, where we could see where the imperfections and where difficult situations emerge, they become more visible and need to be addressed, so we are ready and more resilient in this sector. And how it also became obvious that it is very essential. A close cooperation, and we're lucky that all of you are here as participants or speaker or panelist to continue on that way. There are other words as slavery, hypocrisy, important initiatives, exploitations, and let's say on those, they're not all positive, they're also negative, and that's what needs to be addressed in order to move forward. Live-in care is also one word that pops up that was touched upon by one of the speakers at the end of the last panel. Maybe as a closing, can I turn to our panelists or those that would volunteer to give their one word takeaway, if you have one? I would be happy to hear it from you. Anyone who wants to come in? I see the mic unmuted with Mr. Rio. Cynthia, your one word takeaway.
My one word is recognition of rights.
Thank you.
My one word.
Recognitions of rights. Evelyn, you raised your hand. Oh no, you're busy on the phone. Sorry about that.
Ms. Lieve?
Yes?
I would underline collaboration. I think we have seen this afternoon that we have all a common objective, which is improving the rights of the workers, the quality of these jobs, and through the collaboration, this is the solution for me.
It's key to make further progress. Thank you.
I can perhaps say one. My word would be determination. I think that it's clear there's still a lot of work to do after 10 years. And we've heard a lot of motivation, but we need to be very determined. And I would really underline that. And thanks for the opportunity to do this collectively together.
And thanks for your determination in participating and moving this forward. Olivier, Rowan, do you hear me?
Yes, I do hear you now. It works
Okay.
now. You were just excluded as the only one, so something was wrong with my computer. Now, my word is really collective bargaining, simply because that is what the principal role of the social partners is, and that is basically the basis to get the expertise of everyone who is most involved in it, that is the social partners, workers and employers, and getting for them the best rules so that we create not only win-win situations for us, but for society at large.
Well, thank you for your one word, concept word, collective bargaining. Marie-Béatrice.
Merci infiniment, vraiment ravie d'avoir pu participer. J'avais juste envie de dire une petite note optimiste quand même à la fin de cette grande période, c'est qu'il y a quand même de très belles bonnes pratiques européennes. Je pense peut-être qu'il faut réconcilier la société européenne avec les travailleurs domestiques, peut-être faire un travail plus de sensibilisation, de campagne de sensibilisation peut-être au niveau européen, pour que tous ensemble, les États, les partenaires sociaux, je dirais l'Europe, mais aussi les citoyens prennent conscience de la richesse et de la valeur que représentent finalement tous ces emplois et tous ces métiers pour accompagner nos grands défis démographiques. Et donc, je pense que ce serait intéressant de pouvoir aussi renforcer la mobilisation de tous les citoyens européens par rapport, j'allais dire, à la cause du travail domestique comme étant une richesse à partager. Voilà ce que j'avais envie de dire pour conclure.
Thank you very much. So a positive note, mobilization and sensitization, tous ensemble. Some of the words that popped out for me. Do you want to come in, other panelists? I don't see raised hands, but yes.
I can just, if I may, just this Christian here, just to kind of like take it. I believe that many of those things that have been raised already are really, really important. I mean, the collaboration, social dialogue, collective bargaining, but I think none of this is possible at the moment unless we really cooperate. And the cooperation and the collaboration is what we need to do at the moment. That's the first step, and then we can move forward towards many of the other initiatives that are being raised. But before we sort out some of the challenges together as the stakeholders for domestic workers, we really need to collaborate and cooperate.
Thank you. Any other last words in one word? Okay. If I'm not mistaken, then let me conclude with a few concluding remarks. A positive note, we are 10 years on after the ratification of the Domestic Workers Conventions, and we can see a lot has happened. And with this event, and the report of this event, and also ILO's report, we see there is still some work to do. The positive thing is we're all committed. We all have to be determined, and we are optimistic that this should happen. However, it's urgent, and that's what has been called upon by the participants. Now, the stakeholders in this multi-stakeholders alliance have sent letters on behalf of the alliance to the 19 EU member states that have not yet ratified Convention 189. So those 19 member states will receive that invitation to ratify or consider the ratification with no further delay. So that's as a first concrete follow-up of today's event. Secondly, there's also something that you can do. This is to further support the ratification and the implementation, and is to participate in the selfie contest, let's say, where you can print out the a paper and say why you personally want this convention to be ratified. And then lastly, there is also the survey that all participants will receive to give feedback on how they found the experience with this event. One of the outcomes can be that we need to organize this again in a certain given time, as was suggested by one of the panelists. And definitely, when we come back together in a couple of years, we want to share and show more good practices. We want to add on more EU member states that have ratified Convention 189, and why not also Convention 190, because they are interlinked. So yes, in the chat you find the references to post your selfie. You also found the reference to the report that will be issued. And in conclusion, let me thank all of the speakers on this panel, but also on the other panels of the previous days and of the opening session. We really appreciate your time, your dedication, and let's say also determination to cooperate and strive for more ratification and better implementation of Convention 189. And with those words of thank you, I wish you all a pleasant evening and goodbye.